So that announcement as Carney signed a pact to deepen economic ties with Mexico ahead of the review of that trilateral trade agreement. So what's the significance of what the Canadian side was able to accomplish in their 36 hours there? Well, we have some people who can answer that question. Joining me now are former Mexican ambassador to the United States, Arturo Sarukhan, and Carlos Dade. He's the director of international policy in the School of Public Policy at the University of Calgary. Thank you both for being on Power Play.
Pleasure.
Ambassador, I want to start with you on this one. On the surface, it could look like this is an agreement just to have more talks. But what is behind the agreement for these two countries and what they signed in the last 36 hours?
Well, what they actually signed is still, I think, pretty unclear. I think the next coming days we'll get more information. The strategic partnership obviously involves issues related to trade and infrastructure and deepening the trade relationship between Mexico and Canada. But I think at the end of the day, as they say, half of the game is showing up. And the fact that this is the first time in 8 years that a Canadian Prime Minister has gone to Mexico outside of the North American Leader Summits is a very important piece of the game. The fact that President Sheinbaum accepted Prime Minister Carney's invitation to join him at the G7 summit in Kananaskis was also important because Mexico and Canada had been in a pissing match, particularly since the fall when some Canadian premiers suggested that Canada should throw Mexico under the bus when it came to dealing with then President-elect Trump. Now the great challenge, obviously, is that we both face first a problem of tariffs and tariff negotiations with the United States, and in tandem, the formal start of the review process, the statutory mandatory review process of CUSMA, which is allegedly supposed to start in July, but which will most likely, in terms of what we're hearing in Washington, will probably start in January of this year. So aligning interests, aligning an agenda. I think they both were careful in making sure that no one in the White House thought that Canada and Mexico were ganging up on them, which is a sensitive issue both in Ottawa and Mexico City. But I think that the message here is that we may finally be getting a bit of muscle tone in the Canada-Mexico bilateral relationship, which is long overdue.
Mr. Dade, I wanted to pick up a little bit on what the ambassador mentioned there in terms of what we saw in the fall. How much does this help smooth things over after it wasn't just Ontario Premier Doug Ford who had talked about going it alone in terms of a deal with the U.S. and Canada and kind of excluding Mexico, but Prime Minister Justin Trudeau had mentioned it as well. They kind of floated that idea. How much of this was really about trying to smooth things over and then having this fertile ground now to maybe go forward together?
It certainly played a major role with the Prime Minister's trip, but also with Premier Danielle Smith's trip to Mexico. Look, this is a periodic, an unfortunate but periodic occurrence in the Canada-Mexico relationship. We go through phases of benign neglect. The leaders aren't paying attention, the elected officials aren't, but there is, to be clear, work being done at the ground. We meet with Mexico every year in an intensive set of working groups at the business level, agricultural level, civil society level, academic level. So there is much to build upon and reactivate, which this meeting did. But in terms of the throwing Mexico under the bus, yes, going down and making not amends, but clarifying that the relationship is important, that there were unfortunate comments from elected officials who aren't familiar with the depth of the relationship needed to be done. And Danielle Smith's trip in this regard, I think, was equally important. It shows that it's not just Ottawa that is back on track with Mexico, but it's also the provinces, or at least there's only one province now that may still be problematic, Ontario, but the folks in Alberta, Danielle Smith has made it clear that for everyone else, sorry, we forgot, but we're back on track. We're back on Team Canada, Mexico, Team North America, as the two heads of state put it at the press conference.
Yeah, Ambassador, how important is it to maintain that type of viewpoint and that type of image, that it is not these two countries that are on either side of the United States that are trying to gang up against them, and that they are not trying to hammer out some sort of a side deal without the United States? Because we know that the United States is watching this type of stuff. You have to only look at the U.S. ambassador to Canada, Pete Hoekstra, who has, in the last couple of days, talked about how disappointed he is to hear some of the elbows up talk and some of the boycotting of American products here in Canada. How important is it outwardly to make sure that everybody understands in the United States that this was not that, Canada and Mexico trying to broker some sort of side deal?
Well, first of all, when the US treats its partners like adversaries, its partners need to start acting like allies. And I think this is a bit of what's going on behind the scenes. I think it is important that Mexico and Canada align negotiation postures. In the past, Canada has sort of complained about the trilateralization of its relationship in North America with Mexico in the mix. But I think that obviously, with a potential scenario in Washington, that at the end of the day, President Trump's intention may be actually to get rid of a regional North American free trade agreement and end up with two respective bilateral free trade agreements, one between the United States and Canada, another one between the United States and Mexico. This is a very important conversation because we need to be aligned. We need to be in sync. And there's also an important discussion, which I hope both the Prime Minister and the President had in Mexico City, which, if this scenario that I've just laid out for you does play out, do then Canada and Mexico seek to pursue a bilateral free trade agreement because of the evisceration of a North American free trade agreement. So all of this is important. I think some of the leg room that has gone into preparing the trip, the Prime Minister's trip to Mexico now, and the hard work that's going to start as soon as the consultation processes kick off in the three countries. Mexico has also started its internal consultation process in sync with what Canada and the United States have just done. So it's going to be a delicate dance to send the message to the White House that we're not ganging up and pretending to stab Washington in the back, but that we will work together to defend our interests, and more importantly, to defend what has been a very important success story, which is the North American trade edifice, and to send an important message to Washington, which is, if Washington wants its most important foreign policy recalibration since the end of the Cold War, which is its relationship with China, to be successful, it needs Canada and Mexico in the trade and economic space to ensure that that recalibration succeeds.
Mr. Dade, I've only got about 30 seconds left because we're running out of time, but do you think that this was a good option now and a good meeting to potentially set up a backstop in the event that, as the ambassador said, that there could be the collapse of this trilateral agreement because the U.S. may want that?
Yes, absolutely. We have a twist on what the ambassador said. We have another agreement with Mexico, the Trans-Pacific Agreement, where the U.S. isn't present. So maybe this sparks our thinking about how to work together. We already work together and produce things together to sell in the U.S. We can take that joint production and we could move it to Asia, but we just simply ignored the opportunity. On the larger point of ganging up on the U.S., look, Canada thought it could do better going off on its own last time we sat down with Trump. What that attempt to go alone with the U.S. got us was an announcement on a Monday in August that Trump said he had a deal with Mexico and would see if Canada could join. What wasn't as widely reported was we weren't taken by surprise. We were fully prepared because Mexico had been keeping us abreast of what they were doing with the U.S. People the ambassador and I both know were involved in making sure we weren't taken by surprise. Mexico pulled our butts out of the fire last time. The same thing with steel and aluminum tariffs. It was Mexico that brought a solution to us. So I think the current leadership in Canada is relearning what the public doesn't know, which is we have benefited from cooperation with Mexico. We don't talk about it, and the public doesn't know, because were we to talk about it, the U.S. would get upset. So we don't talk about it. We benefit from this. We don't talk about it. But because we don't talk about it, the public doesn't know. So it feeds a vicious
Yeah.
feedback loop where you then see premiers running off and saying unfortunate things.